The morning mist clung to the fjord like the breath of sleeping gods as Jarl Eriksson stood before his great hall. 4 gleaming silver axes arranged on a wooden table before him. The metal caught the pale sunlight, each blade polished to mirror brightness and inscribed with intricate Norse patterns that spoke of master craftsmanship. These were not mere weapons, but symbols of honor and trust. Word had spread quickly through the settlement that the Jarl sought to test 4 of his most promising shield maidens. Astrid, daughter of the blacksmith, stood with her blonde braids wound tight for battle. Beside her, Sigrid the Fierce gripped her spear with calloused hands that had known many raids. Thora, barely 16 winters old but already proven in combat, shifted restlessly from foot to foot. And finally, Gunhild the Wise, whose strategic mind had saved their longships from Saxon ambushes more than once. The settlement buzzed with anticipation. Children pressed their faces against wooden shutters, while thralls paused in their morning duties to witness this unusual ceremony. The Jarl's weathered face, marked by countless battles and harsh winters, revealed nothing of his intentions. "These axes," Eriksson's voice carried across the courtyard like thunder, "are more than silver and steel. They represent trust, wisdom, and the very honor of our clan." His grey eyes swept over the assembled crowd before settling on the 4 women. "Each of you has proven your worth in battle, but today I test something deeper than sword skill." The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and salt from the nearby sea. Fishing boats bobbed in the harbour, while merchants from distant lands prepared their wares for the morning trade. Life in the settlement continued its rhythm, but all attention focused on this moment. Among the watching crowd stood Bjorn, a thrall captured during a raid on the Frankish territories 3 summers past. His dark hair and slight build marked him as foreign, but his keen intelligence had not gone unnoticed by the Jarl's household. Unlike the others who whispered and speculated, Bjorn watched in thoughtful silence, his brown eyes taking in every detail of the ceremony. The Jarl lifted the first silver axe, its weight substantial in his weathered hands. The blade bore the mark of Thorvald the Smith, whose reputation extended far beyond their settlement. Astrid, daughter of iron and flame, stepped forward. Astrid moved with the confidence of one born to battle, her leather armor creaking softly. The Jarl placed the axe in her hands, and she tested its balance with practiced ease. "This axe goes to the harbour. You will trade it for whatever you deem most valuable to our people's survival through the coming winter." The second axe went to Sigrid, who received her instructions to journey to the neighbouring settlement and negotiate an alliance that might benefit both communities. Thora was given the task of venturing into the deep forest to gather rare herbs that the settlement's healer desperately needed. Finally, Gunhild received orders to travel to the trading post and secure the best possible deal for their surplus grain. As each shield maiden departed on her mission, the crowd began to disperse. Daily life resumed its course, but an undercurrent of excitement remained. The Jarl's tests were legendary, and outcomes often surprised even the wisest among them. Bjorn lingered near the great hall, his duties temporarily forgotten. Something about this test stirred memories of his homeland, where wisdom and cunning were valued alongside strength. He had learned much about Norse customs during his years of bondage, but this ceremony felt different, charged with significance beyond the obvious. The Jarl noticed the thrall's attention and studied him with calculating eyes. "You find interest in matters of war and leadership, thrall?" The question carried no malice, merely curiosity. "Forgive me, my lord," Bjorn replied carefully, his Norse accented but clear. "I have seen many tests of strength, but few that measure the heart." A slight smile touched the Jarl's lips before he turned and entered his hall, leaving Bjorn to ponder the meaning behind this unusual challenge. 3 days passed before the shield maidens began returning to the settlement. The autumn sun hung lower in the sky, and the first frost had touched the edges of the wooden buildings. Jarl Eriksson waited in his great hall, the carved pillars casting long shadows across the rush-covered floor. The hearth fire crackled, sending smoke up through the hole in the roof where ravens sometimes perched to watch the proceedings below. Astrid returned first, her face flushed with pride. She strode into the hall carrying a heavy sack that clinked with each step. Before the Jarl's high seat, she emptied the contents: iron ingots, bronze brooches, amber beads, and silver coins from distant lands. "My lord," she announced with satisfaction, I traded the silver axe to Magnus the merchant. These goods will see us through the winter and beyond. The iron alone is worth 3 axes, and the amber can be traded for grain when spring comes. The Jarl nodded approvingly but said nothing, his weathered fingers drumming against the arm of his carved chair. The hall remained silent except for the crackling fire and the distant sound of waves against the harbour stones. Sigrid arrived as the sun reached its peak, her horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. She entered the hall with the confident stride of a successful negotiator, her red hair gleaming in the firelight. "Jarl Eriksson," she began, producing a scroll sealed with wax. "I have secured an alliance with Jarl Gunnar of the Eastern Settlement. They will provide warriors for our spring raids, and we will share equally in all plunder. The silver axe now rests in Gunnar's treasure room as surety of our bond." Again, the Jarl acknowledged the report with a nod, but his expression remained unreadable. The assembled household members shifted restlessly, wondering at their leader's unusual silence. As evening approached, Thora stumbled through the hall doors, her clothes torn and mud-stained from her forest journey. In her arms, she carried a leather pouch bulging with precious herbs and roots. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent searching in dangerous territory. "My lord," she gasped, catching her breath. "I have gathered moonwort, bloodroot, and the rare winter mushrooms that heal the lung sickness. The healer says these medicines will save lives when the harsh months come. I traded your silver axe to the forest witch for safe passage through the haunted grove." The Jarl's eyes flickered with what might have been approval, but still he remained silent, waiting. Gunhild was the last to return, arriving just as the evening meal was being prepared. She entered with measured steps, her face thoughtful rather than triumphant. In her hands, she carried a simple wooden box. "My lord," she said, setting the box before him, "I went to the trading post as commanded, but found something that changed my purpose. Inside this box are seeds from the southern lands, grains that grow in poor soil and harsh weather. The merchant claimed they could double our harvest. I traded the silver axe for these seeds and the knowledge of how to plant them." The hall fell completely silent. Even the thralls paused in their duties to hear the Jarl's judgment. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the wooden shutters and sending smoke swirling around the rafters. Bjorn, who had been quietly tending the fire, found himself holding his breath. Each choice revealed something profound about the Shield-Maidens' characters and priorities. Astrid had chosen immediate wealth. Sigrid had secured military power. Thora had prioritized the health of their people. And Gunhild had gambled on future prosperity. The Jarl rose slowly from his seat, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the hall. His grey beard, streaked with silver like his hair, caught the firelight as he considered each woman in turn. The silence stretched until it seemed the very walls held their breath. "You have all chosen according to your nature," he finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. "But one choice remains to be made." His gaze swept the hall until it settled on the thrall by the fire. "Bjorn of the Frankish lands, step forward." Bjorn's heart hammered against his ribs as every eye in the great hall turned toward him. The firelight flickered across dozens of faces, some curious, others skeptical that a mere thrall would be called into such important proceedings. He set down the iron poker he had been using to tend the flames and approached the Jarl's high seat with careful, measured steps. "My lord," Bjorn said, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. He had learned long ago that showing fear in the presence of Norse warriors invited contempt or worse. Jarl Eriksson studied him with those penetrating grey eyes that had evaluated countless men in battle and council. "You have watched and listened, thrall. You have seen how each of these worthy shield maidens used the silver axes I entrusted to them. Tell me, if the choice had been yours, what would you have done?" The question hung in the air like morning mist over the fjord. Bjorn felt the weight of expectation from the assembled crowd. Astrid stood with arms crossed, her jaw set with the confidence of one who believed her practical choice superior. Sigrid's hand rested casually on her sword hilt, while Thora clutched her pouch of precious herbs. Gunhild watched him with calculating eyes, perhaps recognizing a kindred strategic mind. "My lord," Bjorn began, choosing his words with the care of a man walking across thin ice. Each choice showed great wisdom in its own way. Astrid secured immediate wealth to sustain the settlement. Sigrid forged bonds that will bring strength in war. Thora gathered healing that will save lives when sickness comes. Gunhild planted seeds for future prosperity. The Jarl's expression remained neutral, giving no hint of his thoughts. You speak of their choices, but not your own. What would the thrall have done? Bjorn drew a deep breath, remembering his life before capture. Days spent in his father's scriptorium, copying manuscripts and learning the ways of trade and diplomacy. His enslavement had taught him harsh lessons about survival and the true value of different choices. If I may speak freely, my lord, I would not have traded the axe at all. A murmur rippled through the hall. Several warriors shifted uncomfortably, and Astrid's eyes flashed with indignation. The Jarl raised a hand for silence, his gaze never leaving Bjorn's face. Continue, Eriksson commanded. The silver axe bore your mark, my lord, and the craftsmanship of Thorvald the smith. Its true value lies not in what it could be traded for, but in what it represents, your trust and the honor of bearing such a weapon. I would have kept it, and found other ways to achieve what the settlement needed. The silence that followed felt heavy as a winter storm. Bjorn could hear his own heartbeat and the distant cry of gulls over the harbour. He had either spoken wisdom or sealed his doom with words that challenged the actions of 4 proven warriors. Thora was the first to break the quiet. But how would you have gathered the herbs without trading passage through the forest witch's domain? The old paths through the northern hills avoid her territory, Bjorn replied. Longer and more dangerous, yes, but possible for one who knows the way. I learned those paths during my capture. When we fled from your raiders through terrain you thought impassable. Gunhild nodded slowly, her strategic mind clearly working through the implications. And the alliance with the Eastern settlement? Words and shared mead can forge bonds as strong as silver, my lady. I have seen my former lord broker alliances with nothing but promises and honor. Sometimes such agreements prove stronger than those bought with treasure, for they rest on mutual respect rather than obligation. Sigrid's grip tightened on her sword, but she asked, the grain for winter then? Would you let the settlement starve for the sake of keeping a pretty axe? Bjorn met her challenging stare without flinching. I would have sought work in the harbour, my lord. My hands know letters and numbers. The merchants who come here often need someone to keep their accounts and translate between tongues. The silver I earned could have bought grain, and the connections made might have brought better trade opportunities. The Jarl leaned forward in his great chair, his weathered hands gripping the carved armrests. You would gamble the settlement's welfare on your ability to earn silver as a scribe. Not gamble, my lord. I would have asked your permission to try, with the understanding that if I failed, the axe could still be traded. But I believe the risk would have been small, and the reward, keeping your trust intact while still meeting our needs, would have been great. The fire crackled and hissed, sending sparks up toward the smoke hole. Outside, the evening wind whistled around the corners of the great hall, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed from the harbour. Jarl Eriksson rose from his high seat, his massive frame towering over the assembled crowd. The carved ravens that adorned his chair seemed to watch with wooden eyes as he stepped down from the platform, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. The hall had never been so quiet. Even the thralls had stopped their work to witness this unprecedented moment. Bjorn of the Frankish lands, the Jarl said, his voice carrying the authority of countless battles and hard-won wisdom. You speak of honor and trust as if you were born to this hall rather than brought here in chains. The thrall stood straight despite the weight of every gaze upon him. Honor exists in all men, my lord, regardless of their birth or circumstances. Slavery may bind the body, but it cannot chain the spirit unless we allow it. A few of the older warriors nodded approvingly at these words. They had seen enough of life to recognize truth when they heard it, even from an unexpected source. The Shield-Maidens, however, remained tense, uncertain how this strange turn of events might affect their standing. The Jarl walked slowly to the great table where the 4 silver axes had first been displayed. Now it stood empty except for the wooden box containing Gunhild's precious seeds. He placed his weathered hands flat against the oak surface and seemed to consider his next words carefully. 3 winters ago, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a man sharing a saga. I received word that raiders from the eastern seas planned to attack our settlement during the harvest festival, when our warriors would be scattered and weakened by celebration. The intelligence came from an unexpected source, a thrall who had overheard his former masters planning the assault. Bjorn's eyes widened slightly as he realized where this story might lead. the Jarl continued, never taking his gaze from the empty table. That thrall risked his life to warn us. He could have remained silent, perhaps even hoped that successful raiders might free him from bondage. Instead, he chose loyalty to the people who had shown him no particular kindness. Because of his warning, we were prepared. The raiders found not helpless farmers, but armed warriors ready for battle. The hall remained silent, but the tension had shifted. Astrid and the other shield maidens now looked at Bjorn with new interest, while the household warriors studied him with measuring eyes. I have watched this same thrall for 3 years, the Jarl continued, finally turning to face the assembled crowd. I have seen him tend the sick when our healer was away, teach reading to children whose parents could not, and share his meager rations with newer thralls who arrived weak and frightened. He has never asked for freedom, never complained of his lot, never shown anything but quiet dignity and service. The fire crackled loudly in the silence, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called across the water. The Jarl walked back toward his chair but stopped before Bjorn, close enough that only those nearby could hear his next words clearly. The test was never about the axes. Bjorn, it was about choices, yes, but not the ones you think. Astrid chose wealth over trust. Sigrid chose power over honor. Thora chose necessity over integrity. Gunhild chose hope over certainty. All worthy choices, but each required sacrificing the gift I had given them. He paused, letting his words sink in before speaking louder, so all could hear. You alone understood that the true test was whether you would value what was given to you, or trade it away for something you thought better. The others saw tools to be used, so you saw trust to be preserved. Astrid stepped forward, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion. My lord, surely practical needs must come before sentiment. What good is a silver axe if the people starve? What good is survival without honor? The Jarl replied. What value has security purchased at the cost of integrity? The axe was not just silver and steel. It was my confidence in each of you. When you traded it away, you told me that my trust was worth less than grain, or herbs, or alliances. Thora spoke up, her young voice uncertain. But my lord, the herbs will save lives when the lung sickness comes. Surely that mercy outweighs keeping a weapon. The Jarl's expression softened slightly as he looked at the youngest of the shield maidens. Your compassion does you credit, Thora, and I do not fault your heart. But Bjorn showed us another way, one that would have achieved the same ends without breaking faith. He turned back to the thrall, and what happened next stunned everyone in the hall. The great Jarl Eriksson, descendant of kings and conqueror of enemies, bowed his head to the foreign slave. You have shown wisdom beyond your station and loyalty beyond reason. The silver axes were a test, but not the one I first intended. They were meant to reveal character, and they have done so perfectly. But the greatest revelation came not from those who received the axes, but from the one who watched and understood their true meaning. The implications of the Jarl's words began to dawn on the assembled crowd. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the hall as warriors and thralls alike struggled to process this unprecedented moment. The great hall seemed to hold its breath as Jarl Eriksson straightened and walked to the carved chest that held his most precious possessions. The iron hinges groaned as he lifted the heavy lid, revealing gleaming weapons, golden arm rings, and ancient treasures won in countless battles. From the very bottom, he withdrew something that made the entire assembly gasp in wonder. It was a 5th silver axe, larger and more magnificent than any of the others. The blade bore intricate runic inscriptions that seemed to dance in the firelight, and the handle was wrapped with leather strips decorated with silver wire. This was clearly a weapon fit for a jarl, perhaps even a king. This axe, Eriksson announced, holding it high so all could see, was forged by my grandfather's smith and carried by my father in the great raids across the Western Sea. It has tasted the blood of Saxon kings and Irish chieftains. It has been blessed by the gods and tested in battle for 3 generations. He walked slowly back to where Bjorn stood, the thrall's eyes wide with disbelief at what he was witnessing. The shield maidens watched in stunned silence as their lord stopped before the man they had dismissed as merely a foreign slave. Bjorn of the Frankish lands, the Jarl said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient ceremony. You alone understood that trust once given should not be traded away for convenience or necessity. You showed wisdom in seeing beyond the immediate problem to find solutions that preserved honor while meeting needs. Most importantly, you demonstrated that true loyalty comes not from binding chains, but from choosing to serve something greater than yourself. The fire crackled and hissed, casting dancing shadows on the walls as the Jarl extended the magnificent weapon toward Bjorn. I offer you more than freedom, though that is yours as well. I offer you a place in my household as a free man, with all the rights and responsibilities that brings. Will you accept this axe, not as a test to be traded away, but as a symbol of the trust I place in you? Bjorn stared at the offered weapon, his hands trembling slightly. For 3 long years he had dreamed of freedom, but never imagined it might come like this. He looked around the hall, at faces that showed emotions ranging from amazement to approval to barely concealed envy. "My lord," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am honored beyond words, but I must ask, what of the settlement's needs? The herbs Thora gathered, the alliance Sigrid forged, the grain Astrid's goods could buy, the future prosperity Gunhild's seeds might bring." A smile spread across the Jarl's weathered face, the first genuine expression of joy he had shown all evening. "And this, my friends, is why he deserves what I offer. Even in his moment of liberation, he thinks first of others." The Jarl turned to address the entire hall. "The needs will be met, all of them. Astrid's goods will indeed buy grain, and her practical mind will serve us well in managing our stores. Sigrid's alliance will strengthen us for the raids to come, and her warrior's heart will lead our shield wall. Thora's herbs will heal the sick, and her compassion will tend our wounded. Gunhild's seeds will plant hope for future harvests, and her wisdom will guide our counsels." He faced Bjorn again, the axe still extended between them. Each choice had value, but yours had something the others lacked. It preserved the bond of trust while finding another way to meet the need. That is the mark of true leadership. Bjorn reached out with steady hands and accepted the weapon, feeling the weight of its history and the warmth of the worn leather grip. As his fingers closed around it, he felt something change deep within himself. Not just his legal status, but his understanding of his place in the world. "I accept, my lord, and I swear by this axe and by the gods who witness this moment that I will serve this settlement and its people with all the strength and wisdom I possess." The hall erupted in cheers and the clash of weapons against shields. Even Astrid stepped forward with a grudging smile, extending her hand in friendship. "Well spoken, Bjorn the Wise," she said, using a name that would stick with him for the rest of his days. As the celebration continued into the night, the former thrall stood beside his new lord, the silver axe gleaming at his side. He had been tested not by holding a weapon, but by understanding what it truly meant. In choosing honor over convenience, trust over expediency, he had won something far more valuable than freedom. He had earned the respect that would make him one of the most trusted advisors in the settlement's history. The 4 SHIELD-MAIDENS had each made their choices according to their nature, and all would serve the settlement well in their own ways. But Bjorn's choice had revealed the deeper truth that sometimes the greatest wisdom lies not in what we do, but in what we refuse to do, even when faced with seemingly impossible circumstances. The silver axes had indeed tested their recipients, but in ways none of them had expected when the test began.